Hello and welcome. During this video, we are going to discuss the client file, as well as how forms and activities are added to the client file. So what is a client file in CenterPiece? Simply put, the client file is an electronic chart where all information about the client is stored in CenterPiece. A client's electronic chart will have a client file that contains the client's name, birth date, and contact information. Each client at your center should have only one file in the system, no matter how many pregnancies, activities, or years she or he has participated at your center. Each client file is assigned a unique identification number called a file ID. Once the client file is created, you can begin adding information about the client's involvement at your center and begin to build out your client's electronic chart. The first thing you will want to create is a case for the client. A client case simply represents a support cycle centered around a specific event, such as a pregnancy or post-abortion counseling. A client file can have one or many cases attached to it. Within that cycle of support, or case, the client will visit your center and receive different services. These services are recorded in activity forms, such as counseling sessions, which are recorded in the concept shared form, pregnancy forms, sonogram forms, etc. Many times a client will visit your center more than once during her pregnancy support cycle, so cases will have one or many visits with the associated activity forms that represent the services the client received during those visits. For example, here you can see that our client came into the Arlington location on the 12th of January and received a pregnancy test and talked with a volunteer about her concerns. Then she returned to the center on February 9th and had a sonogram, talked to a volunteer about her concerns, and received a referral. Because these two visits were for the same pregnancy, they are both placed under case number 1. If a client comes to your center for a second pregnancy-related concern or cycle of support, you will open a second case. Then the visits and activities associated to that case can be added. So let's go ahead and jump into CenterPiece so we can see what this actually looks like. In order to do that, we're going to review a client file that has already been created and filled out. Then in the next several videos, I'll walk you through the process of filling out a new client file and adding all the appropriate activity forms to the file. Okay, so normally the client file will be created by the receptionist in the scheduler once the client shows up for their visit and is checked in, although you can also create it in the client module if you wish. Now, since in our example we're going to be looking at a client file that's already been created, we need to search for it. So to do that, I'll first click on the Client tab and notice that all of the client files are displayed. You can see that there are a total of 1,475 files, and I could page through them using these buttons if I wanted to, but instead I want to filter all these files so I can find the specific one I'm looking for. For this example, let's go ahead and filter by our client's name. I'm going to type in a few letters of the client's last name, and then I'll type in the first letter of her first name. Now also, if I needed to use any advanced search items, such as birth date, I can simply click here on the Advanced checkbox, and you can see the advanced search options right here. Now I'm not going to use these, so I'll go ahead and uncheck the Advanced checkbox, and then I'm going to click Apply to apply this first and last name filter. Now only the client files that match this filter criteria are displayed. And we're going to be taking a look at Carol Goodwin's client file, which is file ID 4528 right here. Now before I click to open her file, I want you to notice that after applying the filter criteria, a yellow bar is displayed with a link to clear the filter. This yellow bar is a visual indicator that reminds you that there is currently a filter being applied to the client files that are displayed right here. Notice if I click the Clear Filter link, the filter that I set, in this case the last name and first name filter, is removed and all of the client files are again displayed. So each time you want to apply a different set of filter criteria, you're going to want to make sure that you first clear the previous filter like I just did by clicking on the Clear Filter link, and then you can enter in your new filter criteria. Okay, so let's once again enter in our filter criteria for the client file that we want to take a look at. This time, however, since I know her file ID, I'm just going to enter that in right here. Then I'll click Apply. Notice that her file is displayed right here because this is the only file that matched the filter criteria. I'm going to go ahead and click to open Carol's file, and the first thing you see here is her profile picture along with a snapshot of her contact information and other information that's stored in her client file form. If I click here on the Details link, I can see a bit more information that's stored in her client file. Then I can of course click here to open the client file, and I can see all of the information and make any changes if I needed to. I'll go ahead and close out of this, and I'm going to give you a quick tour of this client's electronic chart. But remember that we aren't going to do any data entry in this video, but instead we'll cover that in the next couple videos. So first, here in the left task pane, notice that you have the different tasks that can be completed from the client's electronic chart, such as adding a new client file, editing this file, and deleting this file. Below that, you have all of the different forms that can be added to this client file. And here at the very bottom, you have the ability to run the client file summary report that will show a summary of the client's electronic chart, including her different activities and forms. Also note that you can click here to collapse the task pane. This is especially helpful when viewing the client file on a mobile device with limited screen real estate. To expand it again, all I would have to do is click anywhere on the task pane and it will open back up. Okay, next, right down here you see a set of tabs. Let's quickly review these. The Case List tab will show you all of the cases for this client. Remember that a client case simply represents a support cycle centered around a specific event, such as a pregnancy or post-abortion counseling. Notice that this client has two cases. Her first case was opened in 2018 and is now closed. You can see right here that this case resulted in a birth. Also notice that this client was originally assessed as abortion-minded at the beginning of the case, but then changed her mind. And we'll review the different assessment stages in the at-risk timeline video. The next case was opened in December of 2020 and is still open. You can see that she is currently assessed as being likely to carry. Next, the Activity tab will show you all of the different activity forms that have been entered in for the client. I'm going to go ahead and collapse this contact information section so we can see this a bit better. And remember that activity forms represent the services the client receives at your center, things like pregnancy tests and sonograms, as well as the different medical forms like the health history form, the vitals form, etc. Activity forms are associated to a visit form and then to a case. Notice these activity forms are for case number 1. And you can see that Carol came into the office on January 12th of 2018 and had a pregnancy test and talked to a client advocate. Then, also under case number 1, she came back to the center in February 9th of 2018 and had a sonogram. You can see that a health history form was filled out, as well as a vitals form and a concept shared form. Then you can see her current open case, case number 2, right here. We can see that she visited the center on the 8th of December for a pregnancy test, and here are the forms that were entered in for that particular visit. And she came back to the center on January 7th of 2021 for an ultrasound and an STI test, and you can see the activity forms for that visit right here. So the Activity tab is where you will find all of the different visit forms, activity forms, and medical forms for the client. Now I also want to show you that you can filter this activity list and show only specific activities. So let's say that I only want to see appointment forms. I can select appointment from this drop-down, and then I can see all of the different appointment forms for Carol. Okay, next let's take a look at the Children tab. Under this tab, you can enter in any children that the client already had before attending your clinic, and you can record children that are born while she's receiving services at your center. Notice that Carol's son, Sam, who was born as a result of case number 1, was born on the 5th of September. Next, here under the Notes tab, you can see any notes that have been entered in for the client. Notice that I can tell what case the note is for, and this icon right here shows me that this is a medical note. The next tab, Relationships, is where you can enter in any relationships between clients. You can see that Carol's fiance is Torrin Martin and her sister is Elaine Goodwin. This section also allows me to quickly click into either one of their files by simply clicking on their name. Next, we have the Follow-up tab, and we're going to cover follow-up in a separate video, but this is where you can assign follow-up reminders to different staff or volunteers to remind them to touch base with the client. Notice that this section shows open follow-up, meaning follow-up that still needs to be completed, and then by clicking right here, you can see any follow-up items that have already been completed. The next tab, the Documents tab, is where any documents that have been uploaded to the client file are stored. As you can see, the different consent forms that Carol completed during the mobile intake process are right here. The Medical tab is where the medical forms are housed, and this is also where medical personnel do most of their data entry. And we're going to cover data entry for medical personnel in a separate video. Lastly, we have the Audit tab, and this will show you a chronological security log providing documented evidence of 4 key auditable events within the client chart. Each create, view, modify or edit, and delete is recorded with the unique username who modified the file, as well as a date and time stamp and the record's before and after values. And we're going to cover this in detail in the client file auditing video, but let's go ahead and take a look at one of these. Right here on this first page, we have a lot of view events, so I'm going to go ahead and click on page 3, and let's take a look at a modify event. Notice this modify event shows that the sonogram form was edited. It was edited by me, and here is the date and time of when I modified the form. I'll click to expand the row details, and now you can see the before and after values. Notice that before, the lock status on the sonogram form was false, meaning that it wasn't locked. And the after value was locked, and it shows that I was the person who applied the lock to the form. Okay, now before closing, I want to quickly show you one other thing. I'm going to click back on the Case List tab, and then I'm going to click on case number 1. Notice that the case form opens and you can see different details about the case, including the case outcome and the final assessment. In addition, these tabs have changed and are now specific for the case that's open. So this tab here will show the activity forms specific for case number 1, and the rest of the tabs will also show information specific to the selected case, including this at-risk timeline tab. Now, to get back to the client file view where all information, regardless of case, is displayed, simply click on the Case List tab. Notice you once again see both cases, and if I click on the Activity tab, you can see all of the activity forms, regardless of case. Okay, well, that's about it for the client file overview. During this video, you learned that a client will always only have one file in CenterPiece. You also learned that you will open a case for the client for a pregnancy-related concern or other cycle of support such as post-abortion recovery. Next, you learned that when the client comes to the center, a visit form is created along with the different activity and medical forms that represent the services the client received during their visit. We then reviewed the client file page and discussed where all of the information is stored. In the next few videos, we will go over data entry for client advocates or non-medical personnel, as well as data entry for medical personnel. We'll also talk about the at-risk timeline and the other tabs. I recommend watching those videos next. Thanks for your time.